Humanity is using the stupidest weapon I've ever seen. Zather, the veteran general of the Syntrex Dominion, stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching Earth through the massive windows. The planet below seemed so insignificant to him, just another small rock in the vast expanse of the galaxy. But it was a planet that was home to a species the Syntrex Empire had been watching for some time. Humans. Zather had encountered many species in his centuries of service. From the militaristic Zeltrians to the technologically advanced Nazari, no one had ever truly challenged the Syntrex Empire. But humanity, despite its primitive tools and technologies, had been marked for extinction. It was just a matter of time before the Syntrex would show the humans their place in the universe. At least that's what Zather had believed. Now he was starting to wonder if he had underestimated them. The human resistance had been unexpected. They had no advanced weaponry, no powerful fleets, no special technologies that made them stand out. But the Syntrex fleet had encountered strange and effective tactics in battle. It was as though the humans had a secret weapon, and Zather needed to find out what it was. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his tactical officer, one of the few beings Zather had learned to trust. "General, we have a report," the officer said, a slight tone of disbelief in his voice. "The humans have deployed a new weapon." Zather turned to face the officer. "A new weapon?" he asked, his voice cold. "What kind of weapon could possibly matter? We've crushed them with ease so far." The officer hesitated, then continued. It's a slingshot." Zather's brow furrowed. "A slingshot." "Are you telling me that the humans are fighting us with a child's toy?" The officer nodded. "It's true, General. A simple, oversized slingshot, and somehow it's been effective. Our ships have been damaged, heavily, by something they launched with it." Zather laughed, the sound harsh and derisive. "This is absurd," he muttered. "Do they think they can challenge us with such primitive tools? No weapon can stand against the might of the Syntrex." He was sure this was a mistake, some minor malfunction or faulty report. A slingshot could not possibly threaten an empire as powerful as the Syntrex Dominion. However, just to be certain, Zather ordered the fleet to engage. He would crush this ridiculous human weapon, and they would see once, and for all, that they were nothing more than a passing curiosity in the universe. The Syntrex ships descended toward Earth, and Zather watched through the viewscreen as the small, seemingly unremarkable human defense base came into view. It was not much to look at, just a crude outpost, surrounded by defenses that seemed comically outdated. Still, Zather gave the order to begin the assault. The first wave of Syntrex ships launched their attacks. Lasers and plasma bolts rained down on the base, obliterating everything in their path. But as the attacks began, Zather was surprised to see a single human slingshot positioned on the ground below. From this simple contraption, human soldiers were launching massive projectiles into the sky. At first, Zather thought it was nothing more than an attempt to strike back, an insignificant defense. But as the first of the projectiles hit one of his ships, the explosion that followed shook Zather to his core. The Syntrex ships, the pride of their vast empire, had been struck with a force that defied logic. Their shields, built to withstand the most devastating attacks in the galaxy, faltered. The explosion from the impact was unlike anything Zather had ever seen, as though the projectiles carried something more than just mass. These projectiles were tearing through the ships, causing damage that sent shockwaves through his fleet. "What is this?" Zather shouted. "How can this be?" The officer beside him quickly analyzed the data. "General, it appears these projectiles are designed with a unique kinetic energy pattern. There, not just stones or metal. There's something else at play here." Zather's disbelief turned to anger. "Are we to be undone by a child's weapon?" He shook his head. "No, this cannot be. Fire again, destroy their base." But it wasn't just the slingshot that was causing trouble. The humans had turned this ridiculous weapon into something far more dangerous. The next wave of projectiles was launched, but these ones were different. Zather's ships, despite their advanced technology, were unable to predict the trajectory of these strange, heavy objects. Some of them seemed to bounce, changing direction mid-flight, striking the ships in places they were unprepared for. And it wasn't just the damage. Zather could see that the humans were organizing their efforts. They weren't just launching random rocks, they were launching them with precision. "They're learning," Zather muttered. "They're adapting to our tactics." The Syntrex began to panic. Zather's fleet had suffered its first significant loss in years, and it was at the hands of a primitive slingshot. He couldn't understand how this was happening. How were humans, with their crude, outdated technology, able to inflict such damage? How were they using something as simple as a slingshot to defeat the might of the Sintrex Dominion? With rage and confusion clouding his judgment, Zather gave the order to launch the full-scale assault. The rest of the fleet moved in, firing their most destructive weapons. Yet every time the humans retaliated with their slingshots, it was as if they had the perfect counter. They were more than just resilient, they were resourceful. And then something happened that Zather did not expect. The humans began modifying their slingshots. The projectiles grew larger. Their speed increased. They began to add explosives, sharp metal fragments, and at one point, Zather even saw one of the projectiles launch with a trailing electric current. The Sintrex fleet, for all its superior technology, was struggling to keep up with the creativity of the humans. "They're using their limitations to their advantage," Zather said, stunned. "What kind of species does this?" The humans, with their simple, seemingly primitive weapons, had brought down the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever seen. Zather couldn't believe it. Was this the end of his campaign to conquer Earth? Was it really the humans? That made them dangerous? Was it their resourcefulness? He had thought the humans were nothing. He had believed their technology was laughable. But now, after facing their primitive weapon, Zather wasn't so sure. The battle continued for hours. The Sintrex fleet, still reeling from the unexpected losses, tried everything to retaliate. But each time the humans came up with something new, something innovative. And the more the humans fought, the more Zather realized it wasn't just the weapon that made them dangerous. It was the human spirit. By the end of the day, Zather's fleet had suffered more damage than it ever had in the entirety of its existence. The humans, though outnumbered and outgunned, had forced the Sintrex into a stunning defeat. Zather stood before the massive viewscreen, staring at Earth below, his mind racing. He could hardly comprehend what had happened. Was it really true? Had humanity, these primitive creatures, just proven that they were capable of defeating an empire? Zather's mind buzzed with confusion, disbelief, and, grudgingly, respect. The humans had done the unthinkable, and they had used nothing but their creativity and determination. And in that moment, Zather knew one thing for sure. Earth would not be as easy to conquer as he had once thought. The battle had not yet ended, but Zather felt a sense of dread gnawing at him. His fleet, the pride of the Sintrex Dominion, had never been so vulnerable. A few hours ago, he had been confident that Earth would be a quick conquest, just another minor planet to add to the Empire's ever-growing list of conquered worlds. But now, as he stood on the bridge of his flagship, the weight of his misjudgment pressed heavily on him. The slingshot, the simple human weapon, had caught him off guard. Zather could still hear the sound of the massive projectiles tearing through the vacuum of space, striking his ships with pinpoint accuracy. It was a weapon born of crude simplicity, yet it had proven to be devastatingly effective. How could that be? How could something so primitive defeat the might of the Sintrex? Zather paced back and forth in his command center, his mind racing. The humans weren't just using slingshots, they were adapting. They were learning. Each time the Sintrex tried something new, the humans had an answer. It was as if they were always one step ahead. Zather couldn't understand it. He had faced countless species, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. Some were more powerful, others more technologically advanced, but none had fought like this. In all his years of service, Zather had never encountered an enemy that used such basic tools so effectively. His mind kept returning to one question: how? It was then that his chief strategist, an alien known as Vren, approached him, a worried look on his face. "General, we've analyzed the data. The humans aren't using their slingshots in isolation. They're integrating them with other technologies. For example, they've found ways to modify the projectiles. Some of them explode on impact, others are capable of electromagnetic interference. They're using their surroundings to their advantage. It's unprecedented." Zather stopped pacing and turned toward Vren. "Are you telling me they've turned a slingshot into a weapon of mass destruction?" Vren nodded. "Yes, General, and they're only getting better. They've begun launching their projectiles in waves, creating disruptions in our formations. They're even using the terrain to mask their movements, launching from forests, mountains, and even cities. We didn't anticipate this." Zather's frustration bubbled over. What kind of species relies on such primitive weapons? We've faced energy weapons, plasma cannons, and even gravitational warfare, but this is beyond me. He clenched his fists. I don't care about their tactics. We have superior technology. We'll crush them. We'll show them the true power of the Syntrex. But deep down, Zather couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had changed. This was no longer a simple military conquest. This was a test of something deeper, a clash of wills. The humans had proven that their spirit was their greatest weapon. It was something that no Syntrex fleet had ever accounted for. Zather spent the next few hours in his command center, organizing a counteroffensive. He ordered his fleet to regroup and initiate a concentrated attack on Earth's largest cities. If the humans wanted to fight with slingshots, then the Syntrex would show them the true meaning of power. They would unleash everything they had, their advanced weaponry, their superior ships, and their unrivaled tactics. But as the battle raged on, Zather found himself watching the humans closely. The slingshot had been only the beginning. What the Syntrex had underestimated was the human resolve. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, the humans never faltered. They kept fighting, kept innovating, and kept pushing forward. Zather realized that they weren't just using slingshots. They were using everything at their disposal, thinking outside the box, and relying on their creativity and ingenuity to survive. It was a humbling thought. The humans, despite their lack of advanced technology, were adapting in ways that the Syntrex could not have predicted. They had taken the slingshot, a tool so simple it could almost be considered a joke, and turned it into a symbol of resistance, a symbol of human will. Zather had always been taught that strength came from technology and power, that the most advanced weapons would always win, but the humans had proven him wrong. They were fighting with something more, something he couldn't quantify. The battle stretched on for days. Zather's fleet continued to bombard Earth cities, but the humans refused to yield. They kept fighting, using every scrap of knowledge, every tool at their disposal. The slingshots were still a part of the strategy, but they were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Humans were launching drones, hacking into Syntrex systems, using biological warfare, and even repurposing old technologies in ways that made them unpredictable. Zather watched as his fleet took another hit. A massive Syntrex destroyer was struck by a modified slingshot projectile. This time, it had been coated in a strange, sticky substance that clogged the ship's engines, causing it to spin out of control. Zather's engineers quickly worked to stabilize the ship, but the damage had already been done. The humans had used innovation to outsmart him once again. "General, we need to rethink our strategy," Vren said, his voice tight with anxiety. "The humans are not fighting like any species we've encountered. They are unpredictable. They are smart." Zather stood still, his gaze fixed on the view screen. The humans were no longer just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win, and they were winning. Zather realized that the battle was not just about technology. It was about the human spirit, that indomitable drive to keep going, to keep improving, to keep finding solutions even in the most hopeless situations. The Syntrex had underestimated that spirit, and now they were paying the price. As the days passed, the Syntrex began to lose ground. The humans had adapted so quickly that Zather's fleet could no longer keep up. Every time they launched an attack, the humans had a counter ready. It wasn't just the slingshots anymore. It was everything. The humans were using resourcefulness, creativity, and determination to overcome the overwhelming technological superiority of the Syntrex. Zather found himself questioning everything he had ever known. How could a species so simple, so primitive, be so difficult to defeat? They had no advanced weapons, no super-intelligent machines, no massive fleets. They had only their wits, and yet it seemed to be enough. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of battle, Zather called for a retreat. His fleet had been decimated. The humans had fought with everything they had, and in the end, they had won. Zather couldn't believe it. He had come to Earth expecting an easy victory, but what he had found was a planet of people who would not be easily conquered. As his ships began to pull away from Earth's atmosphere, Zather stared at the planet below. The humans had shown him something he would never forget. They had shown him that there is strength in simplicity, that innovation and resolve could overcome even the most powerful empires. And as he turned away from Earth, Zather couldn't help but wonder what other species, like the humans, might one day rise up to challenge the Syntrex. For the first time in his long career, he wasn't so sure the Syntrex dominion would always remain invincible. The humans had proven that, sometimes, the stupidest weapon could be the most dangerous. The retreat was humiliating. Zather had never experienced defeat on this scale. His pride as a Syntrex general had been shattered, and it was not just because his fleet had been outmaneuvered by primitive slingshots. It was because he realized that the humans had something he could not comprehend, something that went beyond mere weapons or technology. They had a resolve, a spirit, an indomitable will to fight for their survival, no matter the odds. It was something the Syntrex had never fully appreciated until now. As Zather returned to the Syntrex capital ship, he stood at the observation window, looking out into the vast expanse of space. His thoughts were dark, his pride bruised. He had underestimated the humans in every way. They had shown him that strength was not just about technology, it was about creativity, adaptability, and the will to fight. His second-in-command, Vren, entered the room quietly. "General," he said, his voice subdued, "we've lost contact with several of our fleet divisions. The humans are using guerrilla tactics, reprogramming our weapons, disrupting our communications, and sabotaging our ships." Zather turned slowly to face Vren. "How did they learn to do all of this so quickly?" His voice was filled with frustration. "They don't have the technology we have. They shouldn't be able to fight like this." Vren hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's not about their technology, it's about their resourcefulness. The humans have learned to use every tool at their disposal, no matter how insignificant it seems. It's almost as if they see possibilities in things that we would discard." Zather clenched his fists. "Impossible! How could a species so far behind in technology be so effective?" Vren looked at him with a mix of respect and disbelief. "Perhaps the humans aren't as far behind as we thought. Perhaps we've underestimated them in ways we can't even imagine." Zather stood still, staring out at the stars. He had thought he understood everything. The Syntrex Empire had dominated the galaxy for centuries because they had the best technology, the most powerful weapons, and the most advanced military tactics. But now, these humans, these insignificant creatures, had brought his entire fleet to its knees. How could it be? How could they wield such power with nothing but their minds? A thought slowly began to form in Zather's mind. He needed to understand the humans. If they were to be defeated, he had to know how they were able to fight this way. He ordered his scientists to capture human prisoners, hoping to glean some insight into their thinking. Weeks passed, and the Syntrex began to gather more intelligence about the humans. Zather observed them closely. They were resilient, resourceful, and incredibly adaptable. They did not rely on brute strength or overwhelming firepower. Instead, they relied on their ability to innovate under pressure, to think of solutions in the most impossible of circumstances. The more Zather watched, the more he realized that the slingshot was just the beginning. The humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win, and they would not stop until they had done just that. One day, while watching a captured human soldier being interrogated, Zather was struck by something he hadn't considered. The human, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, showed no signs of fear. He was defiant, even in the face of certain death. When Zather approached him, the human didn't flinch. Instead, he looked Zather in the eye and said something that stayed with him long after the encounter. "We fight because we believe we can win, and we always find a way." Zather's mind reeled at those words. Find a way. What did that even mean? How could they possibly think they could win against a species as advanced as the Syntrex? He couldn't understand it, but it was that belief, that conviction, that was at the core of humanity's strength. It wasn't their weapons, their ships, or their technology that made them dangerous. It was their determination to never give up. The more Zather thought about it, the more he realized the truth. Humanity's greatest weapon was their willpower, their refusal to be defeated. They had no massive fleet, no superweapons, no overwhelming technological advantage. They had only themselves, their creativity, and their will to fight for their future. And that, more than anything, made them a force to be reckoned with. Back on Earth, the humans were preparing for another attack. The Syntrex, despite their superior technology, were now facing a war of attrition. Every battle was draining them, and their resources were being stretched thin. The humans, meanwhile, were relentless. They didn't have to win every battle. They just had to keep fighting, keep adapting, and keep finding ways to survive. Eventually, the Syntrex would have to leave. It was only a matter of time. Zather had to act fast. His fleet was being pushed to its limits, and the Syntrex Empire was at risk of losing a war they never should have lost. He knew he had to destroy Earth before the humans could gain any more ground. But as he prepared for one final, all-out assault, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was missing something. What if this wasn't just about victory? What if the humans were fighting for something else entirely? His thoughts were interrupted by Vren. "General, we've gathered more intelligence. The humans are launching a new weapon, something we've never seen before. It's not like anything we've encountered. They call it the heart of the slingshot." Zather's mind raced. What is this new weapon? Why haven't we heard about it before? Vren's voice was tinged with awe. It's a massive projectile, much larger than anything they've used before. It's designed to pierce through the most advanced shields we have. They've managed to rig it with explosive charges, and it's being launched with the same slingshot technique. But this time, it's different. It has the power to take out entire fleets with a single shot. Zather's eyes narrowed. So they've taken their stupid weapon to the next level. Vren nodded. Yes, General, they've taken the most basic technology and turned it into something we can't counter. We've underestimated them for far too long. Zather stood silent, staring out at Earth. He had made a mistake. He had thought that advanced technology would be enough to conquer humanity. But he was wrong. It wasn't their technology that made them dangerous. It was their creativity, their unpredictability, and their refusal to quit. The humans had shown him something he had never seen in any other species. A relentless drive to survive, no matter the odds. The attack on Earth was set to begin, but Zather was no longer certain that it would be enough. The humans had already proven that they could turn the tide of battle with nothing more than a few rocks and their ingenuity. What would they do next? What new weapon would they create to turn the war in their favor again? As he prepared to lead his fleet into battle, Zather couldn't help but wonder if the Syntrex would ever truly understand the strength of humanity. The humans had used their weaknesses to their advantage, and in doing so, they had proven that willpower was the most powerful weapon of all. Zather stood at the command center of his flagship, staring at the holographic display of Earth. His fleet had been regrouping for weeks after their unexpected defeat, but now it was time to make their final push. He had spent days analyzing the humans' strategies, their weaknesses, and their resilience. He knew they were clever, but he had underestimated just how resourceful they could be. The humans had already shown the might of their slingshot weapons, how something so simple could devastate his technologically advanced fleet. But now, they had something new. Zather's intelligence officers had reported that the humans were preparing for a final weapon, one unlike anything he had ever seen before. He couldn't help but admire them. They had no great ships or advanced weapons, but what they lacked in technology, they more than made up for with sheer willpower and creativity. The slingshot had been just the beginning. Now they were preparing to launch an attack so powerful that it might just be the end of the Syntrex fleet. Zather's mind raced with calculations. The humans had always been unpredictable, and this new weapon was no exception. But no matter what they threw at him, he was determined to destroy Earth once and for all. The Syntrex were unstoppable, and this was just one more attempt to prove it. No matter how clever the humans were, the might of the Syntrex would crush them. As he prepared for the final attack, a soft chime alerted him to a new message. It was from Vren, his second-in-command, the only one who still had the courage to speak openly around him. Zather activated the message, and Vren's image appeared on the screen, looking more tired than usual. "General, we've intercepted something strange," Vren said, his voice tense. "It seems that the humans are planning to use their slingshot again, but this time they're not launching it with the same force. Instead, they've created a device that will amplify the projectile's power. We don't know how it works yet, but it's unlike anything we've ever seen." Zather frowned. "Amplify the power? How is that even possible with their primitive technology?" Vren hesitated. "They're using some kind of resonance. We believe they've discovered a way to harness the vibration of the slingshot to give the projectiles additional force. It's still experimental, but if it works, it could be devastating." Zather's eyes narrowed. This was bad news. He had been prepared for the humans to use their usual tricks, but this was something entirely new. He needed to understand how this weapon worked before he launched his assault. The idea that something so simple could be transformed into such a powerful weapon rattled him. He stood up abruptly and turned to Vren. "Have you identified the location of the launch?" "Yes, General." They're using one of their largest slingshots in a remote part of their world, hidden beneath the mountains. But we've located the resonance device. It's positioned near the slingshot, and it's being guarded by a small force of humans. Zather clenched his fists. We'll destroy it before they have the chance to fire it. Send in a squadron of ships. If this weapon can give their projectiles even more power, we cannot allow them to use it. Vren nodded. Understood, General. I'll prepare the forces for an immediate strike. The Syntrex fleet moved into position, and Zather prepared to launch the final assault on Earth. He had seen what the humans could do with their slingshots, but this new weapon, this resonance device, was a game changer. If it worked, they could become even more powerful, and Zather couldn't allow that. The humans had already proven that their spirit was unbreakable, but now they were playing with forces that the Syntrex had never encountered before. The attack began in full force, with Syntrex ships descending on Earth's surface. Zather's eyes never left the display as his fleet engaged the humans' defenses. His ships unleashed everything they had: plasma blasts, energy beams, and missiles. But the humans, once again, managed to dodge and evade the attacks. They had learned to use the terrain to their advantage, moving in and out of caves and forests, disappearing into the night. Zather watched as his ships fired, missing their targets again and again. The humans were fast, and they knew their world better than the Syntrex ever could. Their slingshots had already proven their worth, but now they were fighting with a new strategy, adaptability, and determination. Zather had never seen anything like it. "We can't keep this up, General," Vren said, his voice strained. "The humans are forcing us into a defensive position. We need to strike quickly." Zather nodded, his mind still reeling from the surprise of it all. He had never faced a battle like this before. The Syntrex Empire had always relied on overwhelming force, but now, against the humans, that strategy was failing. He realized that overpowering the humans was not enough. He needed to destroy their will to fight. If he didn't, this war could drag on indefinitely. The hours stretched on and the battle raged. But then, something unexpected happened. Zather received a transmission from the human leader, President Taylor. His face appeared on the screen, calm and collected, despite the chaos surrounding him. "General Zather," President Taylor said, his voice surprisingly calm. "You've been fighting for a long time now. I know you're trying to win, but I want you to understand something. We won't stop fighting. Not because of our slingshots or our weapons, but because we believe in something." Zather stared at the human leader, confused. "What are you talking about? Your species is weak. You cannot win against us. Your resistance is futile." Taylor smiled, his expression unwavering. "You think it's about winning or losing in battle, but it's not. It's about the fight itself. It's about what we stand for. No matter how many times we fall, we rise again. That's what makes us dangerous, and that's what you will never understand." Zather was silent for a long moment. What the humans said struck him in a way he hadn't expected. The humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting because they believed in something larger than themselves. They believed that no matter how many times they were knocked down, they could get up again. And they had done it for centuries. As the battle continued, Zather's mind returned to the resonance weapon. The humans were using everything they had to defend themselves, but it wasn't their weapons that worried him. It was their resolve. They were able to take their weaknesses and turn them into strengths again and again. It was a strategy that Zather could never have predicted, and it was one that made them unbeatable. Zather finally understood. It wasn't about how powerful their weapons were or how advanced their technology was. It was about their spirit, the human ability to never give up, no matter how hard the fight. And as the final attack began, with the humans launching their most powerful projectile yet, Zather realized something else. This fight would not be won through brute force. It would be won by the humans' ability to outlast, outthink, and outfight. Zather had underestimated the humans, and now he was paying the price. His fleet had been reduced to a fraction of its former strength. The resonance weapon was still a threat, but it was their unwillingness to give up that had turned the tide of battle. The humans were playing a long game, and they had already won. As the final shot was fired, Zather looked out at Earth one last time. It wasn't over yet, but it would be soon. The humans had shown him that even the simplest weapon in the hands of a determined people could defeat even the greatest empires. The battle for Earth had entered its final phase. Zather stood in the command center of his flagship. watching as his fleet struggled to maintain its position in orbit around the planet. The humans had proven time and again that they were not the weak, primitive creatures he had once believed them to be. They had fought with a tenacity and creativity that had outsmarted the most advanced military tactics in the galaxy. Zather had never encountered anything like it before. Despite his fleet's technological superiority, the Syntrex were being pushed to the brink of defeat. Earth's defenses had adapted at a rapid pace, turning their weaknesses into advantages, and now they were using weapons that the Syntrex had never thought possible. A simple slingshot, once thought to be nothing more than a child's toy, had become the symbol of humanity's resilience. The humans had made it clear that they would not surrender, no matter the cost. Zather could feel the weight of his failure pressing down on him. He had been a general for centuries, commanding armies that had conquered entire worlds. But here, against a species that had no superweapons, no vast fleets, no advanced technology, he was losing. And worse still, he knew that he couldn't beat them in the traditional way. "General, we've intercepted their communications," Vren said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "The humans are preparing for something. They've adapted their weapons again. It's unlike anything we've seen before." Zather turned sharply to face Vren. "What do you mean? What are they doing now?" "They've figured out how to use our own energy systems against us. They've reprogrammed the slingshot's resonance device to tap into our energy signature. We believe they're preparing a massive EMP strike to disable our ships once and for all." Zather clenched his fists. He had been warned that the humans were not just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with ingenuity. He had underestimated them in every way. Now they were about to use his own technology against him. The thought of being defeated by something so simple, something so human, was almost too much to bear. "We can't let them do this," Zather said, his voice tight with anger. "We have to stop them now." His mind raced. The humans had already shown that they could adapt to anything, but Zather's pride as a general wouldn't allow him to back down. He had come too far, fought too hard. He would not let Earth, this insignificant rock, be the place where the Syntrex Empire faltered. The decision was made. Zather ordered a full-scale assault. His fleet would descend on Earth's last stronghold, and they would destroy it, destroy everything. He would break the humans' spirit once and for all. If the humans refused to surrender, then Zather would make them. As the fleet descended, Zather could see the humans preparing for the final confrontation. Their slingshots were already in position, the resonance devices humming with energy. Zather knew that this would be his last chance to stop them. If he failed, it would be the end of the Syntrex Dominion. The humans launched their first wave of projectiles, and as they hit his ships, the vibrations from their resonance devices were so powerful that Zather's flagship shook under the impact. He watched in shock as his fleet was torn apart, one ship after another falling to the humans' simple weapons. The Syntrex had been bested by creativity, and Zather knew there was no turning back now. Vren turned to him, his face pale. "General, we're losing. We can't stop them." Zather's anger flared. "No, we fight until the end." But even as he said those words, he knew the truth. The Syntrex were losing and the humans were winning. It wasn't about weapons anymore, it was about the fight itself. The humans had turned the tables, using everything they had to outsmart and outlast the most powerful empire the galaxy had ever known. In the final moments, as the last of the Syntrex fleet was disabled, Zather felt something he had never felt before: defeat. The humans had beaten him, not with better technology, not with superior firepower, but with the strength of their will. It was something Zather could never have predicted, and it was something that shook him to his very core. As the dust settled, the humans emerged victorious. Earth had been saved, but the war had left its mark. The once-proud Syntrex Empire was now in retreat, its fleet scattered, its leadership in shambles. The humans had shown them that the universe could no longer be ruled by force alone. They had proven that determination, adaptability, and creativity were more powerful than any weapon. Zather stood silently in the command center, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. He had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but now he was returning home as a defeated general. The humans had taught him a lesson he would never forget. They had shown him that true strength didn't lie in technology, but in spirit. And it was that spirit that had won the day. The humans celebrated their victory, but Zather knew that this war was far from over. The Syntrex would regroup. They would rebuild. But now they had a new understanding of the humans, an understanding that made them a force to be reckoned with. The Syntrax could no longer dismiss humanity as weak or insignificant. They had learned that the most powerful weapon in the galaxy wasn't the most advanced technology. It was the human will to survive. As the Syntrax fleet made its way back to their homeworld, Zather couldn't help but think about the humans. They had stood up to an empire that had crushed civilizations for centuries. And in the end, they had proven that no matter how powerful the enemy, there was always a chance for the underdog to win. Zather had been wrong about the humans. They were not weak. They were dangerous in ways the Syntrax had never understood. And as the Syntrax Empire retreated into the unknown, Zather made a vow to himself. The next time the Syntrax met humanity, they would not make the same mistake. They would remember the lesson of Earth. They would remember the humans' resilience, and they would not underestimate them again. But Zather also knew this. If the Syntrax wanted to win the next battle, they would have to fight differently. Because the humans, despite their flaws, had proven that they would never stop fighting. They had shown that with enough determination, even the simplest weapon could become the most powerful. The battle for Earth was over, but the war for the galaxy had just begun.